This is a very odd one. It's an important concept, but it's very odd when you think of it abstractly, and it goes against every fiber of your drawing sort of style. Interior dimension strings should have a dimension missing, A. B, always use full integers. C, be placed right in the center of the plan for legibility. D, should be taken to the studs, not the drywall finish. This is an interesting one. I'm going to talk about D sort of quickly. If you imagine, if you're doing your dimensions, and there's a stud in plan, and there's the drywall on it. Maybe it's a metal stud, maybe it's a wood stud. I've just drawn a wood stud. If you imagine this place before anybody's done the framing, so it's just a floor platform, and now the framers are going to come in and put everything in place, it totally makes sense to have the dimension go to the stud. Because that's what they're putting up. That's the thing that they're installing. And so that dimension going to the stud, going to the structure, is sort of a totally reasonable, logical thing to do. So in this case, we might have something like this, and it would say 3.5 inches right there, because that's a 2x4. So that's a completely reasonable way to go. In fact, in my early days out in the world, one of the guys I was working for was really very, very knowledgeable architect. I learned a huge amount from him. And he said, this is absolutely the way to go. This is what you must do, because this is how it makes sense when it's being built. And so I started doing this. And then when I actually got out in the field, all the carpenters who had gotten used to how most architects do it, which would be to the finish, let's say it's 1/2 inch drywall just to make it easy. So most architects do that, and so the carpenters have just gotten used to it, and so they just add everything up and subtract it in their heads, and they kept making mistakes even though the thing that I was doing was trying to make it easier for them. So you'll find people do this to the structure sometimes. Other people do it to the finish. It doesn't really matter as long as it's consistent on the set. You never want to switch back and forth. You always want to make sure that it's consistent on the set. So while D is an interesting discussion, it's not the answer that we're looking for. How about B, use full integers? Really? Like you can't have a 1/2 inch dimension? That's not it. How about C, be placed right in the center of the plan for legibility? Well, maybe the center is actually the least legible. Maybe there's a lot of walls in the center of the plan. Being in the center or off center doesn't really have anything to do with it. Legibility is a good issue, but being in the center doesn't really mean anything. So the answer actually is have a dimension missing. Now that is a very strange thing. You start to imagine this idea that I have this string of dimensions. So let's say we've got 9 foot there, we've got 4 foot there, 2 foot right there, and then, I don't know, what's that, 11 feet? And how about 8? And here's our outside wall, and here's the other outside wall. So what's the problem with just having that string go all the way through? Well, the problem is, what happens if there's a mistake somewhere? What happens if when they were putting the foundation in back on the first day of the project and it started raining and they made a little mistake and they're 1.5 inches off with the foundation? Or a code official has said, no, I want you to put in another exhaust fan, and so one of the walls got thickened out in the process. Something changed, something was a mistake, there's some problem. Well, if it turns out that it's really important that you've got this 11-foot dimension, maybe there's a piece of cabinetry that fits exactly in that 11 foot, or there's an accessibility dimensions that you really need to have that 11 foot. then you know if we're an inch and a half off, by just happenstance and Murphy's Law, you're going to end up with, instead of 11 foot there, you're going to end up with 10, 10 and a half in reality. Because that inch and a half is going to come from somewhere. And so here's that situation where this is really important to have be 11, but it ended up being less than that just because of some mistake or some change along the way. So what you really want to do is you want to make sure that that number, that 11, is there so that this doesn't happen. Maybe the 8 is also important, so we're going to put that one in. Maybe the 2 is important. Maybe that's showing the size of a closet or something. And maybe the 9 is also, reasonably important, or not so important, but reasonably important. But maybe we don't really care that much about the 4. Like if the 4 was 4-1 or 311 or 310, would it really matter? Well, then don't put it in. So then that one's the one that we say, we're going to take that one out. It just won't be in that string of dimensions. Why? Because then that makes it clear to the contractor, to the carpenter, when they're doing their layout, well, this is supposed to be 8 feet. This is supposed to be 11 feet. This is supposed to be 2 feet. This is supposed to be 9 feet. This is the balance of whatever's left. Now, you may know that it's supposed to be 4 feet, and it probably will end up being 4 feet, but we all know that things change all the time on projects and that these things slide around. This is saying, nope, I gotta have it be 11 feet. And in fact, you might even put a note that says, like this one's the key one, like verify this and make sure that it's 11 feet. But that 4 foot one, we don't really care about it. So we're even taking it right out. And instead of saying 4 foot, we'll say balance, or we'll just leave out the whole thing and just take it right out. So it's really hard when you're used to AutoCAD and things like that, where you do the string and it literally leads you to doing a continuous string of these different numbers. It's easy to just you keep clicking all the way through. It's hard to think, wow, really I should go back and erase one of those? But in fact, you never want to have it be a full string on the interior all the way from one end to the other end of the building. Because if you do, when that mistake happens, and there will be mistakes or changes or whatever, you are at the hands of the gods about whether that the alteration that ends up inevitably coming happens to be in a place where you don't mind it being a different dimension. So it's a weird concept, but with interior dimensions, you always leave one of the dimensions missing from a full string. Exterior dimensions, you can also do the same thing, but somewhere on a plan there needs to be the overall dimension. So you don't have that same kind of rule in an exterior set of dimensions because you need to be able to show the overall and what the column grid spacing and things like that are. How about that? That's a weird one. If you haven't heard that before, that probably threw you a little bit.
Yeah, I think someone wrote grr
in
there.
Yeah, it's an important concept though, because it shows that you understand the difference between the sort of conceptual world of the drawings and the reality of getting something constructed. It's a big deal, and it's an important concept for an architect to be able to explain and to show that they understand that to both code people, owners, everybody, to contractors. So it's a weird little one, but it's actually a key understanding of that difference of the conceptual drawings and the reality of a built environment.